Good morning. It's day 181 and we are looking at the Hebrew poetry in the Old Testament that sits outside of the book of Psalms. At the moment we're looking at a passage from the second book of Samuel, chapter 1, verses 17 to 27. This is King David's lament on the death of Saul and Jonathan. David sang this lament for Saul and for Jonathan, Saul's son. He ordered it to be taught to the people of Judah and written in Jashar's book. On the hills of Judah our leaders have died. The bravest of our fighters are fallen. Don't tell them in Gath or on the streets of Ashkelon. Don't let the pagan Philistine women cheer or rejoice. Stop the rain on Gilboa's hills. Let nothing ever grow in its fields, because the shields of the brave lie there in humiliation. Saul's shield has lost its shine. Jonathan's bow was deadly. Saul's sword was ruthless. It struck mighty enemies down and killed them. Saul, Jonathan, wonderful, dear, together alive, now together dead. You are faster than eagles, stronger than lions. Israel's women mourn for Saul. Due to him you dressed in rich scarlet and wore jewels and gold. These brave troopers are fallen in battle. Jonathan lies dead on the hills. My dear brother Jonathan, how I grieve for you. You loved me with a wonderful love, better than the love of women. The brave soldiers are fallen, their weapons powerless, just lying there. This poem is a song of lament. David had already been selected by God to be the next king of Israel and Judah while Saul remained alive. Saul was fearful of attack from David's guerrillas lurking nearby in Philistine territory. And at the same time he was facing military pressure from the Philistines themselves. David actually recognized Saul's rights as God's anointed king and would never have executed him. Also, he had been in a close personal relationship with Jonathan, Saul's son, all his life. The battle that saw Saul's defeat and Saul and David slain and their bodies left in the dust is described in gory detail in the last chapter of the first book of Samuel. Then in the first chapter of the second book of Samuel, David hears of the defeat and the deaths of Saul and Jonathan from an eyewitness who had escaped from the slaughter and who unwisely confessed first that he was a foreign mercenary and then that he had himself administered a coup de grace to the fatally wounded king, which explained how he was in possession of the royal regalia. He may not have been aware that David had vowed never to harm Yahweh's anointed king, and here, standing before David, was the very man who had finished Saul off. The poem is placed in the text immediately after a furious David had the messenger summarily executed for regicide. Now, all this echoed down the centuries to the time of the English Civil War. It gave Charles I the false and ultimately fatal idea that kings can rule without the consent of the people. But when a settlement was made between Charles's son, Charles II, and Parliament, those who had caused his father's beheading were condemned themselves, and those already dead were dug up and symbolically executed for regicide. As we have seen in the events surrounding the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, strong emotions surround monarchy even today, in a state where the monarch's responsibilities and privileges are heavily constrained by law and custom. David's lament was written up in the official record, but it says much more than would have been usual in such a formal piece of writing. It reads like W.H. Auden's Funeral Blues in places. Don't tell them in Gath, stop the rain, let nothing grow in the fields. And particularly like Auden, it celebrates the love of two men for each other, better than the love of women, David says. This passage must have been known to Auden for that reason, and may well have been the inspiration for his great poem. Now, this doesn't mean that David and Jonathan were gay. There is not enough in the text to prove that either way, and soldiers do often talk about their comradeship with such warmth. But these verses, like Auden's poem, have given encouragement to gay and lesbian believers in their belief that same-sex relationships are not forbidden to them by God. Well, tomorrow we have a remarkable confession on the part of the leaders of the Jews upon their return from exile. And I'll see you tomorrow and we'll read that.